The Bahrain Grand Prix was, if you're McLaren, a race of two halves. For one driver it couldn't have gone any better, but for the other it was all about damage limitation. And there were some other things happening around the race weekend too, as well as during the race weekend. And on the Friday, things were getting talked about before any on-track action had even begun. As mentioned in a video the other day talking about FIA Deputy President for Sport Robert Reid's resignation, I mentioned that there was going to be a vote over a potential return to the fabled V10 engines, something that was tabled by FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem and was met with some scepticism. Not because people don't want the V10s back, because people do want the V10s back, but it's because all of this came at a very convenient time. This was being suggested when the president was being clowned by the media and the fans, so it was seen as saying what fans wanted to hear as a distraction. On Friday, representatives from the engine manufacturers, along with a couple of team principals, met in Bahrain at a meeting chaired by the president to have what they described as a cordial and productive meeting. Representatives from the existing power unit manufacturers were there, as well as representatives from Cadillac and Audi. But the general gist of the meeting was that any switch back to V10s before 2030 was not going to happen. After that, the door is open, but there will need to be another discussion because things will have no doubt changed by then. And people were blaming Audi for this no vote, asking why they had so much voting power, but Audi was only ever going to vote no. They'd been lured into Formula 1 as Cadillac had by promises of the formula being X. Any change to it being Y was going to be against what they'd been promised, and they'd already started work and they'd already spent money and yada yada yada. And Honda and Mercedes also voted no because of the way they are planning to go with things. Honda is very much on the hybrid and EV train, so they were naturally going to vote against that because of the way their business is going to go in the next few years. But like I said, it was just a distraction from the president being clowned on by the media and the fans. So when they eventually voted no, a lot of people reacted emotionally because the thing that they wanted, and basically it confirms that this whole distraction thing worked, wasn't going to align with the way their emotions wanted it to go. But then the action got started on track, and we had a pretty good weekend, all things considered. McLaren looked, much like they had been for the previous three races, the favourites. Suzuka being the outlier where both drivers bungled their fast laps, which might have seen whichever McLaren driver made it to the first corner win the race. Instead, they handed an unlikely win to Verstappen, who took the advantage open to him and then used it. But this time, the McLarens had a decent gap to those around them. They looked comfortable, much more comfortable compared to how they'd been in Japan. But for Red Bull though, it was a different story. The car was struggling, particularly because of the heat and also being absolutely horrendous under braking. It's race weekends like this one that really amplify just how much of a tricky car that thing is to drive, and maybe it'll actually show Red Bull that Max can only do so much with it. Because at this particular weekend, it really was all over the place, and was running where it probably should be given the car's issues. But it wasn't just Max with issues, because Lando had them too. While Piastri was on pole with around 1.5 tenths to Russell in second, which then became third because he and Antonelli had left the garages too early after the second session red flag, Lando meanwhile was down in sixth, and almost half a second behind his teammate, which in that car should not be happening. Tsunoda made the top 10 while Hamilton also struggled, being up to 5th at one point before his lap was deleted for track limits, something that Hulk had his deleted for and should have allowed Albon into the second session, but it didn't. It's one of those crazy things that they haven't really thought of. And I did comment on Twitter about the whole Lando being 6th thing for someone to reply, well, there's no mention about him still being in front of Max. But that is kind of like Liverpool, the best football team in England right now, losing in a cup game to, say, Bromley, and then going, yes, we lost to a team that's 3 or 4 divisions below us, but you forgot to mention that we still scored 2 goals. That car should be 3rd, minimum. Lando should be 3rd, minimum. Not nearly half a second off his teammate, as the case was in this particular qualifying session. But to give Lando credit, he owned up to it, saying that it was like he'd forgotten how to drive. He told the BBC, I just don't know how to approach it. I can't figure it out. Every time I try something, it's good for one session, and then it's the wrong thing for the next session because the wind's changed, and I just can't flow with the car. And when I can't flow, I'm just not very quick. I've just got to work on myself. I can't fault the team and the car is the best by a long way, but clearly I'm just not clicking at the minute. And Hamilton had the same self-critical outlook on his qualifying performance, saying, not much I can say, I'm just not doing a good enough job, have to keep improving. I will try and see if I can get into the top 5, but we will see. Clearly the car is good enough, certainly not a good feeling for sure, I really don't know. I really don't have a lot of answers for you guys, just wasn't quick today. But that's qualifying, they've still got 57 laps on Sunday to try and turn their bad qualifying performances into a decent race performance. And Lando had made an absolutely blistering start, making up for his poor performance on Saturday by going from 6th to 3rd by the time they left turn 4, which kind of put to bed the Geyser choker and bottler talk for at least a few minutes, only for all that to come undone immediately because it turns out he'd started outside of his grid box. Brilliant. Apparently when he pulled up to his grid slot before the start of the race, so after the formation lap, he realised he'd parked too far back, so he moved forward to get back into position and then overcooked it. But he still had time to make up the positions. A safety car might come to his aid at the right time, but more importantly, he had a quick car, and the McLaren was going to be easier on its tyres than everybody else's car was. So the clouds over Lando could clear, eventually. You know, all being well. But one thing I noticed in the race, at least in the first couple of laps, there were a few drivers locking their front wheels. Now, you do see drivers lock wheels over the course of a Grand Prix, but for that many to happen in the first 2 or 3 laps or so was more than I'm used to seeing. Was it heat? Dust? I actually don't know. But Russell locked up going into turn 1, Behrman locked up at the start of lap 2 going into the same corner, Bortoletto locked up into turn 4 lap 2, and then Antonelli did the same at turn 7 on lap 2. I can't remember the last time I saw that many cars lock up in quick succession. Behrman's was by far the worst though, the tyre resembling the proverbial 50p piece and vibrating like a madman for the next 15 laps was not going to be fun. I thought I'd just explain that whole concept to you. This is a 50p coin, which has a distinctive shape. Because the car has locked up, the round tyre now has a flattened off portion to it, like this 50p coin does. The problem is, when you have a badly flat spotted tyre, when you brake for a corner there's the potential for the tyre to catch on that flat bit as you pull up, and then make the problem worse. And then worse, and worse, and worse. If the flat spotting gets too bad, the car's suspension could be shaken apart. See Raikkonen at the Nürburgring in 2005. But despite his car issues, Max seemed to be doing alright, considering. He managed to make a move on sights around the outside and then complained he wasn't left enough space, but I think he got the bare minimum, and he seemed to be in control of his Red Bull even if the pace of the car wasn't there. Now Red Bull had brought a brand new front wing with a longer cord flap that was supposed to help with balancing the front and the rear, and we've seen that the Red Bull is very much rear limited, and Bahrain has quite a few traction zones compared to Suzuka that will amplify the issues that that particular car has. Turns 1, 4, 7, 8 and whatever number the final corner is. I dread to think what that thing's going to be like at Monaco. On lap 9 there was a cracking piece of wheel-to-wheel racing between Hamilton and Sainz. Carlos had the very aggressive defence that forced Hamilton too deep into the corner, with Carlos keeping the position on corner exit. They kept it close for the next few corners, but a good exit from 8 plus the DRS got Lewis up the position into 8th before turn 9, and for Sainz that battle was probably personal. It was a slow move up the order for Hamilton, but with Leclerc holding 4th, it seemed like Ferrari had made a move forward with that new floor they brought with them. Around lap 11 is where the first stops were being made. Lando came in but had to wait 5 seconds before his car could be touched because of the penalty for starting outside of his grid box, which might have allowed Verstappen a chance to catch up a little bit. But Red Bull had problems of their own during the pit stops. The role of the lollipop man in pit stops is long gone. Teams are now using a traffic light system, presumably to have fewer bodies around the front of the car, and because pit stops are so fast these days, those lollipop men aren't really needed anymore. But Red Bull found that there was a problem with their traffic light system. Max had his tyres changed and for whatever reason the light wouldn't go green, or whatever colour Red Bull uses to signify go. So Max was left there waiting a little longer than he otherwise should have been. Now eventually he did get going, I imagine he was told to just go, but that would have been a frustrating moment. When the same thing happened to Tsunoda less than 30 seconds later, it was clear that there was some sort of electrical fault going on. But despite the issues, Max only lost 2 seconds. It could have been a lot worse. He still completed that whole trip through the pit lane faster than Norris did. Ferrari, meanwhile, had stayed out. Leclerc and Hamilton had stayed out longer, having taken the medium tyres compared to the softs that everybody else had bolted on. How much longer did they go? About 7 laps. While Ferrari would have been at a grip disadvantage in the first portion of the race, the mediums would then allow them to have the grip advantage after that particular stop. And it worked. Leclerc would pass Norris on track on lap 25 with fresher rubber. But then some luck for Norris because the safety car was called due to debris being on the track. What had happened was Tsunoda and Sainz had come a cropper, and Sainz had got this massive hole in his side pod as well as missing a chunk of his floor. But Norris wasn't the only person to luck into things, because just before the safety car was called, Verstappen had been in to get rid of the hard tyres that he was on, because on that Red Bull, those hards were utterly useless. Now people were questioning why they would do such a thing, but there was method to the madness. At least, I think so anyway. High degradation track and a very, very hot track, so they needed the hardest available compound to go as long as possible. It's just that on that particular car, the drivability wasn't as good as the on-paper gains. At the same time, Red Bull had endured another bad pit stop. The right front wheelman needed 3 attempts to get the gun on, and this put Max down in plumb last. I'm watching the extended highlights just to get a refresher on everything because A, I've slept in the interim, and B, I spent most of yesterday playing Stellaris, so I quickly forgot everything that I had watched. It looked like, on these highlights at least, that it was like one of these NASCAR competition cautions. Max goes in, he comes out, and then suddenly there's a yellow with no actual explanation as to why that yellow is there. That's why it felt like one of those NASCAR cautions. But because a load of other people came in to get rid of their tyres, Max went from last up to 8th. The safety car had basically rescued his, well, what was going to be potentially a pointless race. Pointsless race. I mean, it would have been pointless as well, Red Bull being there, because they just weren't competitive, but certainly pointsless. That is the right term, isn't it? Moving on. When the race restarted, Piastri once again buggered off, leaving Russell, Leclerc and Norris in pursuit. Now, Norris needed to clear Leclerc, who was on the hards, but there were several laps where Norris just could not get by, even with Leclerc having a tyre disadvantage. With 8 laps to go, Norris finally made it past, and then set after an ailing Russell. Russell, meanwhile, was really in the wars. He was on tyres that wouldn't last very long compared to the ones that Norris and Leclerc had, because he was on the softs while Leclerc was on the hards and then Norris on the mediums, and his car was also shutting down. His gear selection was all over the place, his brake-by-wire was having issues, and the transponder was on the fritz, meaning that he dropped off the timing screens despite still running around in second. It seemed that if it was connected to the car by a cable, which almost everything on a modern F1 car is, then it was playing up, including the DRS. This one is completely baffling, and despite the fact I am actually wearing a George Russell t-shirt underneath this hoodie, I think it was the correct decision that the FIA could make once they'd investigated it. But I would say that I'm British. Russell's DRS had opened when he pressed the radio button. Yeah, I know. And he quickly noticed this, closed the flap and then lifted off just to make sure he lost time rather than gaining time. The FIA noted in their little report that they put up on the internet afterwards that the connection between the automated DRS system and the car had failed, and they also noted the electronic issues that Russell was having. When pressing the radio button to tell the team he was having issues, it opened the DRS flap when he wasn't in any position on the track to be able to do so. The FIA also noted that Russell had activated his DRS for a total of 37 metres and gained 0.02 of a second, but then lost 0.2 in lifting. Now, there will be people up and down the land saying that George wasn't penalised because he's a British driver and British drivers don't get penalised, which is just yawn. But in 2018, Sergio Perez did exactly the same thing at Baku and wasn't penalised for that either. And in addition to this, Perez had done it twice during that Grand Prix with no penalty. So there is precedent here. But somebody in a comment section here is turning to 1.3.3 of the International Sporting Code, saying, if a car is found to not comply with the applicable technical regulations, it shall be no defence to claim that no performance advantage was gained. But the thing is, this wasn't because Mercedes wasn't complying with the technical regulations. This is because of a catastrophic failure of the onboard systems that is something that can happen. What we've had here, and this is something we don't normally get from the FIA in these modern times, is an application of common sense. But at the same time, there are people complaining that the FIA has set a precedent with this. But the precedent was set back in 2018 with Perez, and those comments have been left on the race's article that mentions that very precedent. So we've had an application of common sense and it's in line with the previous time that this has happened. It's not like George and Mercedes deliberately overrode the system to gain an advantage, doing it deliberately. It's just one of those things that happens, and the FIA has basically gone, okay, yes, you've had a colossal failure of your onboard systems. We're willing to look the other way because you quickly realise you had a problem. You quickly realise that you've done this. We'll just let it go, and we'll try and figure out some other way of putting in a failsafe or whatever. It should also be noted at this point that Leclerc's DRS system also opened when it wasn't supposed to, like he wasn't within 1 second of the guy in front in the designated DRS zone, and he wasn't investigated at all for this. So this whole thing about passport tax or whatever it is just a complete non-argument. Also, I have been exaggerating all of this for entertainment purposes, so you don't need to take it too seriously. So with burned tyres and a car that was in danger of shutting down, Russell somehow staved off Norris's attack. Maybe Lando just took too long to get past Leclerc, and that gave George just enough. Now Lando tried an outside pass at the start of the final lap but couldn't make it stick. At this point, the Formula 1 feed decided to put Oscar in a tiny little box at the top left of the screen to show him crossing the line while focusing entirely on the battle between George and Lando. The proper way to do this would have been to cut away from the battle as Oscar crossed the line, but then cut back. But by this point, the battle was over unless George's car broke down. He was too far ahead of Lando to have another crack. And at the same time, we missed the overtake that Verstappen put on Gasly to snatch 6th right at the death. But then the coverage of the whole afternoon was all over the place at times. I get that you can't focus on everything all the time, but show the winner crossing the line. Always. Oh, of course, silly me, it's because George and Lando are British, that's why they did it. Again, yawn. But earlier in the race, just after the safety car period ended, they showed Verstappen trying and failing to overtake Ocon while Norris was being bullied by the two Ferraris. And then they cut to the two Ferraris and Lando at turn 4 when Lando got back in front of Hamilton. But yeah, anybody who's blaming Sky Sports for that needs to give their head a wobble. It's not Sky controlling those TV shots, it's FOM, which is an American company headed up by an Italian. So I don't know where all of this has come from. Rant over the results. Piastri won the race from Russell, who was largely cruising until the last few laps when he came under threat from Norris, and just held him off with an ailing car on worse tyres for that point of the Grand Prix. Norris completed the podium, which was decent damage limitation, but he probably should have done a bit better over the course of the whole weekend. And then you had the Ferraris 4th and 5th, which is pretty good going after Hamilton's bad session on Saturday. Now Verstappen snatched 6th, which was probably the best he could have done, but the safety car did help him out, which will be a relief to him. But Red Bull definitely need to admit they've got something catastrophically wrong with that car, surely. Gasly capped off a fantastic weekend with 7th, with Ocon's Haas in behind, and then Tsunoda got his first Red Bull points in 9th, with Behrman taking another point in his Haas. Hülkenberg was then disqualified for plank wear, same as Hamilton in China. But here's a hot take. I think Mercedes are one decent upgrade from being dark horses for the championship. Russell is most definitely the best non-McLaren / Max right now, and if Mercedes can unlock some more potential in that car, then he and Antonelli, who once again pulled off some absolutely brilliant racing moves in this race, should be up there. Now Kimi lost out through strategy and other things going against him, but he was really racy out there, sending one bigly on sights into turn 1 from way back, and also managing to stick one on Verstappen. And if Mercedes can get the car upgraded enough and come out the other side of the Spanish Grand Prix in a decent position, then Russell is an outside bet for the championship with this early season consistency. Ferrari has also been nudged in the right direction with this new floor they've got, and it will be interesting to see what else they can get from the car when they go to Jeddah. 4th and 5th is a good result for them and kind of negates the bad Japanese Grand Prix they had. But Bahrain is a track they've traditionally done well at, so it might be a one-off at the same time. But who knows? We'll need to wait a few more races to find out. Lando will also have to hope that this weekend was a one-off. Struggling to overtake a slower Ferrari on slower tyres and then struggling to overtake a slower Mercedes with even slower tyres that was on the edge of a blue screen of death. That's something that needs to be ironed out incredibly quickly. Otherwise, after Jeddah, we could be seeing Oscar in the lead of the championship and then trying to work out where McLaren will have to go from there because only one of them can win the drivers. But McLaren say they're not going to do that, but I don't know, things can change. Anything can happen in Formula 1 and it usually does, etc. But, you know, I'd like to know what you think down in the comments and whether you enjoyed the race. So I'll hand things over to you now. So then, a look at the major talking points around the Bahrain Grand Prix that happened at the weekend that seemed to have a bit of everything. Well, except rain. Although rain in Bahrain would have been insane. Hey, that rhymes. But if this video has given you some food for thought, then do like the video so I know I did a good job. And for more stuff like this from the channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the fine folk over at Patreon for the continued support. And if you want to help with the picture purchasing piggy bank or otherwise keep the lights on around here, there will be a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates with the F1 store, and some other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks if you just want to top up my coffee cup or otherwise do a one and done donation, and memberships for Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.